Good morning, everyone. If we haven't met before, my name is Ben Wilkes. I'm the program manager at the TomTom Foundation. And on behalf of our board and our team, I want to thank each of you for being here. If you are fully awake and present, please feel free to turn on your video. We'll look forward to an opportunity to all get into small groups later on in the session. But for now, I'm joined by three incredible leaders who are working in the arts and the humanities, who will share insights in turn to help you redefine how you think about art and its connection to community. This morning's event is part of a 7-week virtual event series called the Cities Rising Summit. All Cities Rising events are available on a pay-what-you-can scale, thanks to the support of our sponsors and community members like you. So if today's program resonates, please consider becoming a contributing member to the foundation. You can do so on our website, tomtomfoundation.org/give. This event is part of a week of thematic programs focused on the arts and is brought to you by the Elizabeth Graham Firestone Foundation, who we thank for their incredible support. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce you to our first speaker of the morning, Dr. Ebony Lumumba. Ebony is the chair and associate professor of the Department of English, Foreign Languages, and Speech Communication at Jackson State University. The title of her talk is Access, 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 How the Arts and Humanities Can Set an Example for All. So Dr. Lumumba, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled and always sort of in awe when folks take in art talks and these sorts of engagements on their own time. And hopefully you're in the comfort of the space where you feel most creative and most comfortable. When I discussed the possibility of sharing this morning with Ben and the folks at TomTom, it was on the heels of a conversation about access and in conjunction with the arts. And that is something that has been in the forefront of my mind, honestly, my entire career, but especially now as we sort of are in the midst of these unprecedented times. I'm a literary artist and a professor by trade, and the reason that I can sleep at night in a profession like that, considering my identity intersections, is because I see literary art and my engagement with it as a means to open up this world that has been closed to so many of us in so many ways. So I've always felt that art and artists show us ourselves. Art is a lens for who we are, who we have become, and perhaps who we are becoming. And it's a more accessible, palatable lens. We also are shown ourselves through media and all of these other realms, but we tend to accept it more readily. We tend to absorb it in ways that are more meaningful when it comes through art. And so art is valuable beyond words to me. In plays, we see ourselves dramatized. In paintings, we become the colors. In stories, we see our triumphs and our defeats narrated, perhaps in ways that are more real than when we lived in those very moments. And so art to me has always been a lens, a way of seeing, a way of understanding, a guide even at moments to show us where we're going and perhaps that we need to dodge certain things along the way. When the pandemic hit, I started to see it as this metaphoric art, despite it being ravaging our communities and causing so much trauma, because the pandemic started to show us ourselves. It unearthed every inequity, every imbalance that was already in play, that we knew was there in our society and in our communities. It swung into focus those things that we've swept under metaphoric rugs for so many generations. This pandemic has made us see. And what have we seen? We've seen Black and brown communities ravaged by an illness because of lack of access to equitable healthcare. We knew that this was a reality in our community, but the pandemic forced it into our line of vision. We've seen the most vulnerable forced into food lines and in the dire need of the things that they needed all along, but now those needs are more pressing. We knew that existed, but the pandemic forced us to see it, forced it onto the main stage, if you will. In my profession as an educator, I saw young people stripped from the resources that they depend on to survive, for nutrition, for counseling, in some cases for protection. They were isolated from these campuses that are so critical to their social needs. Their schools were ripped away from them. And as the result, it wasn't only a matter of equitable education, it was a matter of them not having access to a person that they trust, a community that made them feel safe, the food that they needed to be able to focus on all of the other events and responsibilities of the day. That all of a sudden was no longer an option. We saw what we have always known rest in the belly of our beast, racism, rear its ugly head in ways that forced folks to the street amid a public health pandemic to protest that we are done dying. The pandemic showed us ourselves, and as our society and country's dirtiest laundry was aired amid this devastating public health crisis, I continue to think about art and the artists. As a scholar and purveyor of literary art, I have always gone to the written word for solutions and solace. I mean, think of how many writers have saved their countries, started revolutions, shown us ourselves so that we get better. I thought of the need for artists, and we need artists more than ever right now. We need creatives and creators to drag the bed of our trauma to unearth beauty that is born in hope, to not only get through this, but to get away from all of the things that it made us see and to become better. As this pandemic began to ravage our lives, I sat in meeting after meeting, some with folks who are affiliated with TomTom, and heard from organizations, arts organizations specifically, who feared that they would have to close their doors altogether, perhaps indefinitely. Museums' doors were closed, theaters halted productions, festivals were canceled, and the fundraisers that these organizations depend on postponed indefinitely. And so it seemed that art would cease in the way that we had known it, like every other facet of our life. But I'm proud to witness that this has become a moment to reverse this disenfranchisement rather, that the pandemic has forced into our line of vision. I've come to see those same organizations who were scrambling to keep the lights on, keep the doors clean, let alone open, fearing their closing. I saw them reconsider and acknowledge that their pre-pandemic identities had been inequitable. That while there were exhibitions that honed in on cultural nuances and acknowledged marginalized communities, they were locked, literally and figuratively, behind the four walls of the museum and the galleries, where too many would never feel welcome and never see it. I saw that they realized that these shows that merged cultural identities and honored the unrefined would only be enjoyed by those who could afford tickets or who felt comfortable in the sectors of town where our theaters exist. They realized the limitations of work, politics, access were isolating them from scores of communities who were themselves creating art, who had something to teach our arts communities. And so we've seen the four walls of the museum literally torn down and virtually open, with open air exhibits and virtual exhibitions, pop-up and public art that resonates with the communities in which they actually exist, brings the museum to the worlds that it has for so long only put on display. Art talks are available on podcasts, and school children can experience Broadway and perhaps even produce some of their own content, and we will all see it. Churches and public libraries are opening their parking lots so that folks have access to Wi-Fi, whether or not they are members or parishioners. For the first time, this art that's produced and displayed in formal galleries can be viewed in the exact same mediums as art produced in our neighborhoods and barrios. And I feel that that is hopeful. That is access. Admission fees are gone and everyone is invited. No one has to worry about if they have something to wear to attend this exhibition. This is access. Our worst of times has forced us to see the unseen and not only include them, but center them and move out of the center ourselves as those who may be privileged enough to experience the arts. Isn't this what could save us? What should save us? Survival is dependent on the many. And the arts in this time of trauma has begun to show us that we all experience a stunning kind of victory when we can all participate, learn from one another, and not privilege one form over the other. So I'm hopeful in this time, hopeful for our salvation, hopeful for our betterment, hopeful for our communities, because we've now seen that although we were producing and creating, we were still doing so in a virtual vacuum. And those walls have been laid down. And so what I hope is that as we move towards post-pandemic, for whatever that will look like, we won't get away from allowing the arts to reach the farthest outskirts of our communities and our cities and erasing the margins so there is no marginalia and we're all a part of the whole. I'm hopeful for that. And that's what I believe will save us. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Ebony. I think that is the perfect framing for this conversation. And it turns this element of hope that I think a lot of us are feeling into a call to action. So thank you for sharing. That was wonderful. Let's peel back another layer. Christian Zabriskie, the executive director of Onondaga County Public Library System, which is nearby Syracuse, New York, for those unfamiliar. He's also the founder of Urban Libraries Unite, which is a passionate group of urban library professionals and advocates working to build community-centered 21st century libraries. Title of his talk is The End of Conventional Wisdom, How Libraries Can Be the Community Resource That We All Deserve. So Christian, I invite you to take stage now.
Hi, everybody. Wow, that's a tough act to follow. Dr. Lumumba, that was an amazing talk. I have notes, actually. I have things I want to follow up on. I want to thank Ben. I want to thank the rest of the TomTom Foundation for all the great work that they've done, for everyone who's done all of this work. I want to actually riff off of my fellow presenters' talk and say that I know fully that the libraries are part of some of that institutional four walls. And I fully recognize that. Aspirationally, I think maybe we're the kind of scruffier cousin to the, you know, to the formal museum hierarchy. But I mean, I get it and I see it, and we're part of that too. So I want to kind of have that be part of the conversation of what we're talking about and part of what we're reframing and part of what we're kind of talking about today. So, you know, one of the things that I want to say in my talk is that I want to kind of reframe how you're looking at and considering public libraries and the library in your life and what you're thinking about kind of the library experience to be, for me to then be able to discuss it out from there. So traditionally, libraries are quiet, they are passive, they are at their essence transactional, right? So you come, you take this book, which by the way, if you haven't read Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, you absolutely should. You then take it away. Maybe you read it, maybe you don't. Maybe you learn something from the subtle interweaving of race and identity in like tween-centric appropriate materials. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you just like think the dinosaur is cool. I don't really care, right? That's not my deal. You bring it back to me. It better be in good shape or else there's a problem. And then that's it. That's what the library experience is, okay? And a lot of people see it that way, and it's been kind of cultivated that way. And it is still that. I mean, you can still get that. If that's what you're looking for, that's still an option. But there's a lot of other stuff too. And I mean, I kind of want people to understand that, you know, I want to reframe that and have you think of librarians as really as information first responders, right? So like, what if you had a friend and they were like your pal, and they kept their nose out of your business unless you needed them, but they were really, really smart and they had tons of good ideas and resource and judgment, and then they just didn't bother you again? That's kind of your local librarian. I mean, that's literally what your local librarian wants to be in your life. If your organization needs a space, we can probably hook you up. If you want to found an organization, I mean, my business partner and I founded our not-for-profit, Urban Librarians Unite. It's a straight up C3. You know how we did it? We read books from the library. But you know, I mean, that's how it works. We're perfectly happy to embed in your community. We're perfectly happy to mess with everything you want us to mess with, and then never be heard from again. That's kind of our shtick too. Privacy is really important. Anonymity is really important to us. These are all the kind of things that are really, really big for us. And I think that when you start shifting from that idea, you know, that kind of passive response into the more, as I say, the information first responder, then you see things that happened like after Hurricane Sandy. Myself and my colleagues responded very strongly after Hurricane Sandy. And we were able to do that because we'd all been working in those communities. We knew people in those communities. We were respected and trusted in those communities. We went out to the Rockaways, which in Queens really got hit hard by Hurricane Sandy. If you're not familiar with it, it's kind of a weird split community. There's some very affluent beach houses, and there's a lot of public housing with principally African-American communities that have some real socioeconomic challenges for them, right? But the community resource that was trusted was the library. One of our community librarians set up like a code exchange, was distributing water, was distributing clean toys for the kids before the power came back on, literally before the power came back on. Our little group, ULU, which is a tiny little not-for-profit, I mean, none of us get, I mean, the interns all get paid, but nobody else in our organization takes a paycheck, right? We went out to the Rockaways on the first day it was open from the NYPD so that we could keep the book bus open and provided book service. And we did story time, and we did all these things that are very trad librarian things, but we were doing them kind of in the midst of all this chaos. And that's where, you know, that's where our brand is very valuable. That's where we have these very valuable experiences. And that's where we're kind of constantly, I mean, we are really a relentlessly innovative profession. We really are super competitive about it. We all know what each other are doing for innovation. We steal from each other relentlessly.